Hello and welcome everyone to our research briefing on the macroeconomic effects of the child tax credit. My name is Hala Ahmed. I am the VP for PR and Policy Communications at JFI. We'll be starting right away and jumping right into it. So thank you for joining us. We are having a 15-minute short presentation, and please, if you have questions, save them for after those first 15 minutes. I'll just give a quick overview of the Jain Family Institute before I pass it off to my colleagues, Claudia and Steve. The effects of the child tax credit and guaranteed income on the economy. This is part of a portfolio of work under our largest policy area at JFI, our guaranteed income policy area. The Jain Family Institute is an applied social science research institute that is based in New York City. We have a few policy areas of focus that include higher education finance, guaranteed income, and digital ethics. But as I mentioned, guaranteed income is our largest area, so we focus on a variety of cash policies and have been supportive of analysis related to the stimulus checks, the child tax credit, and the range of income support policies that have come up, especially in the past year. To speak a little bit about this paper series, I'll pass it to Steve Nunez.
My name is Steve Nunez. I'm the lead researcher on guaranteed income at the Jain Family Institute and also a co-author on the paper. I don't want to take up too much of the time here, so I just wanted to give you a little bit of context. We have a white paper series called Getting to Guaranteed Income, which is exploring questions about how guaranteed income can be implemented as a policy, focusing mostly at the federal level. And this is actually the third paper in the series. We had two previous papers, one which was about the actual infrastructure for getting cash into people's hands, and that we wrote, Building a Helicopter. The next was about the role of guaranteed income in the safety net, what sorts of policies it complements, it replaces, and which sorts of policies it really is not meant to replace. And this paper, which is a critical review of macroeconomic models for guaranteed income and the child credit, tax credit, to sort of get at questions about the larger effects of these policies that can't easily be answered by much of the empirical work, especially pilot work that's been done over the last few years. We have another paper coming out on political economy of guaranteed income that Hala and I will be writing, actually, which will be releasing sometime early next year. So look forward to that. But in the meantime, I would like to turn it over to Claudia. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Let's see. So as Steve and Hala said, the guaranteed income portfolio of work is broad at Jain. And I think what's really distinctive about it is bringing research and data and not putting a thumb on the scale as to whether these programs are good or bad, and frankly showing that it really does matter on the details. So as was said, we're going to focus a lot on the macroeconomic effects today. But it's important to tie this to what is more commonly discussed in the discourse about economic implications, and that's the direct microeconomic effects. So it's really important what families do with, if they receive the child tax credit, what they do with that money, how they change any behaviors, whether it's work, and then thinking about just how those direct effects translate into the overall economy, whether it's GDP, labor force, or in this case, what we're showing are poverty rates. So this is some earlier work, and you can see there's 3 research briefs. This is more of a promo for other work. Just to be clear, there's a lot of work that Jain has done in the micro space, and it's evaluating policy, different options for policy. What you can see in this particular analysis is the current program, so the enhanced child tax credit that we got in the American Rescue Plan. It's estimated to have a large reduction in poverty. And if you think about where that's coming from, a lot of it's coming from not having a work requirement. And so, and then you can see the cost, like you have to think about dollars and cents too. And you can see that you lose a lot more in the poverty reduction than you do in saving costs. So this is an example of the analysis done at more of the direct effect. And the macro that we're going to turn to today takes those direct effects and looks at feedback. Like, how does this over time translate throughout and kind of spread throughout the economy? Okay, and so just to make sure we get the big picture before we dig into the details, so there are three main takeaways that I want to make sure that you leave with today. And I should say all of these takeaways are us critically evaluating 6 cutting-edge macroeconomic studies. We read them, so you don't have to, though, you know, go for it. But these are really technical papers, and we were looking for a broad range of work, lots of different ways of financing, lots of different ways about modeling the economy, thinking about how people behave. So as with a lot of macroeconomic literature, there are many different conclusions, many different predictions, but we think it's important to dig into those. The report goes into a lot of the reasons why the predictions, why the models differ. And we're just going to give an overview of that here today. So of the takeaways, I'm going to show you in just a minute how different the views are on how this affects, say, GDP over the long run. And it's important, knowing those differences exist, not to let a single study or a single framework drive a policy debate. We have something to learn from the wide range of models that are out there. The really key assumption in any of these models is how recipients will change their behavior, how much they work if they're given this income. And then not only how recipients change their behavior, but then as it starts to filter through the economy, will other people change how much they work? Right? This is extremely important in determining whether guaranteed income, child tax credit is really good or is really bad. So that's an important distinction to think about, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I just want to stress that the macro, what differentiates it is it thinks about feedback loops. It's important to do this within models. It's really hard to do it in your head, right? And we can uncover some potentially unintended consequences or small issues that will snowball over time. So if nothing else, this is a good intellectual exercise. I would not take any number and run with it. It's more like thinking through this concept of feedbacks. Okay, so what this is showing you is us taking the results from six of these different macroeconomic studies. What we've chosen here is just a small sampling of the predictions that these models make. We want to be able to show you different ways of financing, whether it's through taxes or deficit. These do affect the results. It's rare that they completely overturn the results, but they are important in how the effects on the economy happen. There are different types of modeling approaches within these groups, these 6 studies. And what you can see is exactly what I told you were going to see, is that there are a wide range of opinions about whether the new child tax credit will be beneficial over the long run, raise GDP. So we have 2 studies that show that, or whether it will decrease GDP. GDP is not like the most important measure of the quality of life in this country, but it is one that we think about in terms of output. It's our total output, it's our total income as a country. So it's a useful metric to think about, and this very much exemplifies what you'll hear in research studies. There's a lot of disagreement across them. And these are, you know, again, I wouldn't take any one of these numbers and run with it, but a lot of these estimates of increases in GDP or decreases are pretty close to the size in terms of percent of GDP of these programs. So like these might look small, but they are important effects that we should talk about. We're going to. All right. Next slide. Okay, so what I said earlier is what economists, what these models embed as a belief about how much people change their behavior. This is so important. This is important in any macroeconomic study of any safety net program. So this is not new to guaranteed income. What we're showing you here, and economists, our standard models conceptually, how much you work is totally about how much you get paid, right? Like, and we know work is more than that, but it's not a bad place to start. Like, if I get paid more, I will work more, right? So but these models vary in how much that response is. In a lot of microeconomic studies of guaranteed income, other cash transfers, they find that people don't change their work hours much. In some macro studies, they have large changes. So this, again, is kind of showing you the differences of how much people would work. And this is like kind of the parameter that's assumed in there. I'm just giving you like a test case of a 10% decrease in wages. But it's important to know different macroeconomic models, different economists believe that there'll be big changes in how much you work and smaller changes. If there are fewer people working, if there are fewer hours, we will be able to produce less, holding everything else constant. So this goes into these GDP effects. It's one reason why you see good stuff and you see bad stuff. Okay, so that's on the work, and really that is such a key debate about all of these kinds of programs. Now, the other piece, when we produce output, we have people who are working very hard producing things, and then they have tools. So they have some kind of what's referred to as capital, and they put the two together and they make stuff, right? And so investment by businesses is how we build up and maintain those tools. So if you have less business investment, this is another way that you will have less GDP. Now, here's a good example of the feedback effect. Businesses do not get the child tax credit. Families do, right? But business owners make decisions about how much to invest, and they will respond to changes in interest rates, changes in how much they think they'll have profits, like how much they think consumers will buy in the future. And so again, here you see differences across the models. There are also some that look at different forms of, this is changes in the capital stock. There's different ways to measure investment. But when we look at all 6 studies, it's this mixed bag of positive and negative, very much lines up with GDP, positive or negative. And this is also something that we have to think about, and something that a microeconomic study of what do families who get the benefit, this would be missing from that kind of study. And yet it's also, investment is very important when we think about our productive capacity. What's the size of the pie? All right, and like we said, we're going to keep this brief so you can focus and we can react and respond to your questions. So the closing thoughts that I wanted to kind of add on to what we've already said is, while I haven't gone into the specifics of this, the financing, whether it's via taxes, particularly if it's payroll, income taxes, versus deficit spending, so just printing the money, these do have effects on changes in the after-tax wage, which again, economists think those changes really drive. If you're going to change how much you work, it's because of the after-tax pay. And they can also have different effects on business investment, again, subject to a whole set of assumptions about what businesses respond to. But there are differences in the report. We spend more time, particularly in the appendix, going through the different scenarios people look at. As I said before, and I'll just keep saying it, these macro studies, it really is important to think about feedback loops. It's a good way to catch unintended consequences. There are a few papers in these studies that look at education, and I think some of these results end up being pretty counterintuitive, in the sense that the child tax credit means that you don't have to work as hard to get by like you did before. So maybe that makes the value of education less because you don't need to earn as much. So these are things that, while we might not agree with the logic, it is helpful to think through the assumptions, think through why we invest in education, and if nothing else, just be prepared for the possibilities. One thing that I know gets asked about a lot, and so we're anticipating a question, is what does guaranteed income do to inflation? What do these models say? The class of models that we study in this report are about long-term effects. After years and years, after prices have adjusted, the studies we look at do not speak to inflation, and frankly, over the longer term, inflation is not the star of the show. right? It's about how much real stuff do we produce? How many, like what can families actually buy? How much housing, how many consumer goods? It's not about the price they pay. So inflation, short run phenomenon, I can talk about that all day too as a macroeconomist, but really like when we think big picture, long run, that's not where it's at. And that's not where these models speak to, because they are very much focused on these long run outcomes. The last thing I'd say is, we are looking strictly at a guaranteed income program, the new child tax credit. We need to think about how guaranteed income, how the child tax credit fits within the whole set of policies. And in fact, it's the case where, some of the papers in here talk about education might have fewer investments because the benefits are less in terms of after tax wages. And yet we can do other programs like free preschool that lower the cost of education. So we should understand what one program does so that we can pair it in a way with other programs. We are happy to take any questions. If you read the report, if there's something that comes up, there's some other question you have our email. This is what we're here to do, is to help give information, get research and data to you. Thanks.